Are you ready to become a downhill running pro? In this episode, we will reveal expert techniques and tips to help you master the art of running downhill. Welcome to episode 216 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury free running. I have Coach Lu back on the show from our Healthy Runner coaching team to reveal some expert techniques and tips to crush your downhill running and hopefully your race. Welcome back on the show, Lu. How you doing today?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here back to see everyone. And I'm so happy to share my experience and lessons for downhill running. I'm so excited for this episode.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those specific things that, and is the reason probably we haven't focused on it in 215 episodes on the podcast yet. But this is so relevant for those that are really looking at running a fast marathon. A lot of people choose
hmm
a course that has a net downhill or is downhill the whole way through. And with you being our marathon and speed specialist on our team, I knew this was a topic that you will really be able to help many in our community who are training for races like this. And before we get into downhill running,
Uh-huh.
I just want you to give the listeners a little recap since our last talk, which was all about long runs with spice. And
Uh-huh.
we had this chat about how we inject some pace work into our long runs, and we did a full episode on that. We were talking about you training for Chicago. So why don't you update our listeners what happened after that, and then what was the goal race that you actually did just finish? And congratulations, by the way. So yeah, let's update our audience on what your running has looked like.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Coach Lu here. I'm a run coach and I'm also a certified personal trainer. My goal race was Chicago, but 2 days before the race, I got COVID. So that was a no go. I signed up for Houston instead. Chicago is in October and Houston is January, so 3 months. I kind of get back and was pretty good. Despite all the things, inconsistency, because I did pace a lot last year, I was able to run a really consistent race, almost even split, and end up 303. It's not my PR, but I'm pretty happy given what happens, inconsistent training cycle, and yeah, still a BQ time, so I'm not too worried. Too sad, not too sad. It wasn't as planned. I thought I was able to break three again, but it's still a good race, and I love it. It's super flat. It's not downhill. It's flat, but it's good.
Yeah, and you just to give some people some context there. So Lou's talking about he didn't get a PR, but it was still a super impressive time considering this guy has ran a lot of marathons in the past year, pacing a lot of marathons officially as a pacer for many races, but then unofficially with helping friends because
Mhm.
Lou is has the huge heart. And how many marathons did you run last year?
This is one of the do as I say, not as I do thing. I did 12 marathons, but as Duane mentioned in one of the podcast, you don't race all the marathons. In fact, all these 12 marathons I ran are not racing marathons. My PR was under 3 hours, and none of these marathons are even under 3 hour 30 minutes. So the fastest I pace is 3 hour and 30 minutes, and I even paced a 4 hour 55 minutes marathon, so really slow. So I'm not racing all of it, and it's really I didn't go for PR this year either. So it's a lot of marathons, but mostly just pacing, and I enjoy it. I enjoy helping people. I help so many people achieve their goals. I'm happy. So that's kind of my down year. I take it easy and have fun, do a lot of marathons, but it's just slow. It's like ultra training.
Right. Yeah,
This
and
is
I
not
would I would
recommend. Right. This is not recommend for first time runners. Do not try it at
right.
home.
Yeah, and no, this is perfect. I love that we're giving a context because I would argue honestly, since I've known you for the last 4 years probably now, you've been really preparing your body for something for a year like this, right? Like your base level of training and your foundation was so consistent, and you had so many consistent miles
Hmm.
and consistent running under your belt for many years that
Hmm.
really prepared you to be able to, do the amount of marathon distances in 2023,
Hmm.
with staying healthy, and for you to be able to run these and not race them.
Right.
So I think that's like perfect context. But at the same time, you're also realizing that you didn't give your individual body the full time and energy of like a full marathon training cycle that you would have liked to, in order for you to get like your best time right in the marathon distance, even though your time is incredible. And like you said, you still got a BQ. But I think that's great context, and
Hmm.
I think for everyone to listen out there, and if you are race happy and you're just like need to sign up for a lot of marathons,
Hmm.
and or if your goal is like Lou to like be able to do all 50 states eventually, um, make sure that you are doing all the things that Lou is
Yeah.
spending time at building that solid foundation that he has established over these couple years. And he's been smart about how he's running those races too, and he's not racing them. So put that
Right.
all in context. And switching gears a little bit to like downhill running,
Hmm.
what has your experience been with downhill races or downhill running, either personally or from like a coaching standpoint, for athletes that you've helped program and train and successfully be able to like crush their races that were downhill courses?
I have some experience on downhills. I ran 3 Boston marathons, and they are downhill, overall downhill. Especially the first 3 miles, they are significant downhill. That's a lot of people who bonk because they start too fast. That's I can talk a whole day about that. Starting too fast and then bonk, and at the end your legs are trashed. Blah 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 blah. And you can refer back to my Boston episode, how to run Boston MPR.
Yep.
That's actually my PR. And but yeah, let's focus on the downhill portion. A lot of people in Boston, they go too hard in the downhill portion, and then you hit hard on mile 17 to 21, a lot of hills, and then finally still downhill. So I had some experience on the Boston course, downhill course, net downhill course. Uh, there are a few other courses that's somewhat downhill. Wine Glass, I did CIM, California International Marathons, all downhill. So these are my experience, and I'm preparing for this Revel series. It's all downhill series. Revel White Mountain in New Hampshire. That's a new one that just inaugural race this year. So these are my experiences. I also
Excellent.
help
Yeah. So
from.
just
Mhm.
sorry, before you talk about some of those people that you've helped, my
Mhm.
ears perked up when I heard Wine Glass because I'm going to be running that this year. So I'm going to have to pay attention to this, and I'll probably have to re listen to this episode when it does air on the podcast during one of my runs. And the
Mhm.
Revel series, right? They have like a bunch of different races throughout the country. Is that correct? But this is the
Yes,
first one that they're going to do in New Hampshire in the White Mountains.
in the northeast. Almost the first one in the east coast actually.
Oh,
Everything
okay.
else on the west coast.
Nice. All right. Perfect.
And these races can be aggressive. The Revel Big Bear has 5,000 plus feet net downhill. It's crazy.
Wow.
White Mountain is not that bad. 2,350 feet downhill.
Okay. Yeah, so I just think of like me tumbling down a hill. So it's pretty steep. So yeah,
Really
we're
steep.
definitely going to want to get into this. But Yeah, what has your experience been from like a coaching standpoint?
I shout out to Rachel Buck, Rachel Wood, who did St. George as her first marathon downhill, and our own coach Whitney ran her Mesa marathon, half marathon
Nice, and
downhill.
those are downhill. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. So yeah, you've helped prepare athletes to be able to tackle downhill running,
Hmm.
and have a successful outcome, like Rachel did, and we had her on the podcast, and we shared her story actually from that race, on the episode with you. And any trainings, guys, we talk about that, like Coach Lu has been on the show before. I have a specific link, like with his bio and all of the trainings that Lou's done. So, like I said, he's been like our marathon speed man. So, like all of his trainings are like interval running. How do you do track workouts? How do we add like pace work into long runs? We talk specifically about the Boston Marathon and how you can be able to conquer that course itself.
Hmm.
So I have a link that I'll put in the show notes that has all of them, so you can get all of these trainings that we're referring to.
Make sure you check back. A lot of interesting, important podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we learn, we're always learning, and I continuously learn from you, for sure. And that's why I just love having you on the show to share with our community, because you have a skill set and expertise that, quite frankly, I don't. I hope one day to have that skill set and expertise, but you keep
Sure.
learning too. So it's like
Yeah.
you're always raising the bar here. So guys, for like today's episode, this is going to be like your ultimate guide to mastering the exhilarating like techniques of running downhill. And in this informative conversation with Coach Lu, we're going to take a little deep dive into the intricacies of running downhill. Like, how do we do it? What are some of the form cues? And then we're going to really get into his insights and effective strategies for training that are going to really enhance your performance, and most importantly, because this is the Healthy Runner podcast,
Yeah.
minimize your risk for injuries. So
That's
whether you
important.
are running Boston, or whether you have aspirations or dreams to run Boston one day, whether you're running a Revel race series near you, or you just want to learn how to be more efficient, like me, basically, or well, I guess I could say I'm really paying attention for wine glass now. But if you want to be like more efficient for tackling the hills in your neighborhood, because I know I got some downhills. In order for me
Yes.
to get home, I gotta tackle some downhills, and I want to make sure my form is good, so I don't wind up having knee pain when I do it. So if that's you, any of those scenarios, this is the episode for you. You're gonna really enjoy this conversation. So, Coach Lu, I guess let's start out with the basics. Like, what makes downhill running unique?
Okay. I just want to quickly add that I learned a lot from this podcast too, and from this podcast series too, and I heard so many things, and I'm happy to share my skill set, and I learn from other people too. Okay, let's go back to our uniqueness of the downhill. In general, running downhill is easier on the cardiovascular system, but harder on the body. By meaning harder on the body, it's because there are higher impact on the musculoskeletal system. Dwayne, you wanna fill in something about the
Oh man, he said musculoskeletal system, so of course I got to jump in there. So yeah, this is like impact forces. So there's this thing called gravity, guys. In case you're not familiar with it, but if we're running downhill, the force of gravity and our body weight is actually now smacking the ground. Right, our foot's hitting the ground.
Mhm.
There's increased ground reaction forces that are coming up from the ground through our our tissues. So our long bones, our tibia. You guys hear about like tibial stress fractures, um, shin splints, knee pain, right? Like these are the common things that occur and stresses that the
Mhm.
body could incur with downhill running,
Mhm.
because it's more load, more force to the bones as well as to the muscles.
Right. Awesome. See, I'm learning something here. The other thing for the uniqueness is the the change of form. Obviously, when you're running downhill, it's not the same as running on the flat. It's different from running uphill too. So when you're going downhill, it's just easier to overstride, and that will lead to more impact on the heels and knees. Just as Duane mentioned, gravity, right? On the flat, each step when you run is like mini jumping. And when you're going downhill, the jump is harder. Let's say it's almost like a mini fall each step, if you think about it, right? So like a mini fall, free fall, just mini. So that's more impact on the heels and knees. And the form will change.
Right. So,
We'll,
and the most common form error, I guess, that we do see, and I think it's probably most likely because it's instincts, right? Like if you were to imagine, right, you're like walking down a steep downhill,
Mhm.
naturally, your body's going to be like, I'm falling forward. So, what do I do to counteract that? I lean back. And
It
I think,
does.
the first time a runner encounters like a steep downhill or any downhill, quite frankly, I think the natural reaction our bodies have learned over time is to lean back. And unfortunately, with running, when we do that, that does put our foot way out in front of our knee. And when your foot's hitting the ground out in front of our knee, that is what we call overstriding.
Yes.
And that is the most common running form error that has been associated with the common running related injuries, specifically when we're really looking at patellofemoral pain or runner's knee or IT band syndrome. This is a common injury I see a lot in those training for the marathon on their long runs, and they are in a hillier area. This is when that IT band syndrome is going to creep up, is on these downhill runs.
Yeah.
And especially when they're getting those long runs up to the 14, the 16, the 18 miler. This is usually when I start to see folks who have this problem, and
Right.
it is because of that kind of running form error that you speak of.
Mhm. Yes. I like you mentioned that when you get the run longer and longer because the body are tired and you start to
Mhm.
lose the form, and it's easier to have deviations of the form, and it's easier to make some form mistake if you're not conscious. So that's why we need to train and practice.
Yeah. So, okay. So, just kind of to recap that, because I
Mhm.
definitely want to go down ways that we can think about having proper running form going downhill. But really, what makes this downhill running a little bit more unique
Mhm.
than if you're running in a flat area, and you're starting to do some downhill training, is it is actually easier in our cardiovascular system. So it feels easier. We like downhills as a runner, especially if you've had to run uphill a lot and you're like, this is freaking hard, right? You see a hill that goes down, you're like, ooh, awesome. This is great. This is going to feel
Yes.
easier. Um, so a lot of times too, I think our minds can play tricks on us where we get lazy in the mind and we think, oh, this is easy. Let me just let the hill take me. But if we're not paying attention to what we just talked about, we get into those form errors, right? So it's easier on the cardiovascular system, but it's actually more stress and force to our muscles and bones, so our musculoskeletal system,
Yes.
and it requires different types of muscle contractions. And I guess we can kind of talk about that with how we train for that later, but
Mhm.
it does require that what we call eccentric force. So it's like a braking force of our
Yes.
muscles to slow us down so we don't just like, trample down the hill. And then it changes our running form. So, like, naturally, our running form does change when we go downhill.
Yes.
Was that a good summary there?
That's great.
Okay, perfect. So, how do I prevent um, some of those running form errors, or like w- how how do you counsel your clients who are tackling some downhill running? You know, how should they be running downhill? What are some of the tips that you kind of guide them on?
Let's start with the forms. You can practice that consciously. First is forward lean. Well, definitely not leaning backwards, and you're not leaning that much forward, but you are leaning a little bit forward so that just enough that your center of gravity is not behind you, behind your feet. And let's say if the hill is not really steep, essentially you are pretty straight rather than actually leaning forward. You are you are actually pretty straight, just not leaning backwards. So the center of gravity still goes through your feet. It's just not behind your feet or in front of your feet. It's still like going through the feet. So the body is straight, and it feel like you are leaning forward, but you're actually going straight.
Right. So in relation to the ground, essentially, you're still, I think what you're saying is
Somewhat
like
straight,
perpendicular to the
somewhat,
ground,
yes, maybe a
but
little bit
because the
forward.
ground is angled downward, it feels like you're leaning forward.
Right.
Okay. All right. Got it.
And the other things that engage the core, you, you, yes, you feel like, oh, you're going downhill. It's great, but you still want to engage your core so you can have control of the form, and also relax your shoulder. Actually, the whole upper body, keep it relaxed. That will be helpful so that the gravity take you. If you're contracted, it's harder to have a better form. And shorten the stride length. Yes, with a forward lean and proper, if you're not leaning backwards, usually it's less likely to overstride. But still, you want to consciously shorten the stride length and maybe increase your cadence a little bit consciously. So you are going, the turnover gets faster going down. That helps reducing the impact, and that helps for the gravity to carry you forward. Finally, you want to just let the arm maybe make it a little wider a size by the side, so that kind of balance the torque that you go more extra torque you go when you go downhill.
I like it. So you're kind of increasing the base of support, adding more stability and balance almost by having a little bit
Yeah.
wider placement of your arms to,
Yes.
okay. I like it.
When you're going on the flat, usually we keep our arms really close to the body, but when you go down, you can make it slightly further away. There are people saying from ultra runners actually, when you see a proper downhill technique, it looks like they are drunk. It doesn't look the greatest when you're going down when you have your arms slightly extended, but that's better when you are able to carry that away. You need to just keep practicing, and start to feel it.
Right. And yeah, I think all those tips are just spot on, Lou, and that's why I feel like when I see it downhill now, I
Hmm.
used to in the beginning, like I said, take off, right? Where you're like, "Oh, this is easy, just like go with it." But now I feel like yes, it's easier on my cardiovascular system and maybe my heart rate might recover a little bit,
It
but my
does.
mind I still feel like it needs to be turned on. And it's almost like more of a mind challenge to keep everything that you just said, right? So I implement it and I'm like, okay, let's turn the legs over now, increase the cadence, relax the upper body, don't tense up, let the legs just go,
Hmm.
increase your turnover rate. So
Yes.
you're just getting quick and your speed is going to increase a little bit naturally because gravity's taking you down and you're avoiding breaking. And I know for me now that I've certainly not mastered yet, I wouldn't say mastered, but as I've gotten better at running down hills, at conserving energy, I
Hmm.
notice at like races, and I will get a little bit frustrated if you have a bunch of people in front of you who really don't know this technique, they will be slowing down, which can screw you up because they kind of get in your way because you know you're going to actually speed up a little bit to conserve energy and just get your legs turning over so
Yes.
you're not like fighting the downhill. So for me, I still feel like it's a mind challenge. So now when I see an uphill, I'm like, all right, it's a mind challenge because now it's going to be a mindset, and I want to prevent myself from burning out going uphill. And
Hmm.
I think about the different technique changes I'm going to need to go up the hill. But then when I go downhill, it's not like the mind can just like take off and just like, oh, take a break. No, the mind is like turned on the whole time I'm going downhill because I'm still thinking about like all of those form cues. I don't know. Was that like common for you? I'm sure like for you, it's probably like second nature now, but do you remember this being like common for you?
No, it's not second nature. There's still a lot to learn. But I really like that you emphasize the mindset. The mental part is so important. Yes, it's important on the uphill. It's on the downhill. It can be important on the flat too, because it may feel boring. It Let's say, put it this way: any endurance race, the mental part is as important as the physical part, if not more. And you have to be focused. If you want to go for a good race, yes, you will have to focus and do everything. If you're just going for fun, then you can chat and everything. Still don't get injured though. But mental is really important. You have to be focused if you want to go hard, because if not, you lose sacrifice the form, you may injure yourself. So keep your focused. And the other thing, practice can help. When you practice a lot uphill and downhill or flat, then on the race day you just have to be a little focused, but you don't have to think specifically, oh, I have to put my shoulder here, I have to do this and that. Maybe you want to intentionally focus on the turnover rate, but that's it. But practice will help. Less
Yeah,
thing to worry
no,
about on the race day.
I love it. First off, when you mentioned before about like having fun on race day, I just got a flashback to you and I actually running New Haven Labor Day road race this year when you and I were running and we're like chatting and we're like seeing people we know, and
Yeah.
like that was just so much fun. I just remember that moment and like running with you for a couple of miles and not like stressing and like having fun at the race. But I think your point is so well taken on number one, mindset. And it's part of the training. And that's why it's like one of our 6 steps to growing as a runner
Yes.
is having the proper mindset for like that intended goal of that training run, that race, different parts of the race, uphill,
Hmm.
downhill, flat, like you said.
Yeah.
How do we get rid of boredom, right? And this is like, hey, I'm just going at the same elevation this whole time. And you talked about practice, and this is
Hmm.
where, and we're so passionate about like training for races that you need to practice this all in training.
Yes.
So yeah, let's kind of segue to like, how do we train for downhill running? So if I want to get better at it or I want to be successful on race day, like what are some tips for training downhill running?
There are a lot of things you can do. But before we start, we talk about practice, right? It doesn't mean that you have to practice every day. That's too much. It's so much impact on your body. Consider running downhill, a training, let's say a downhill training section. Consider it as a quality section as well. It is a quality section. Just like you can do uphill repeat, you can do downhill repeat. Don't don't start just running downhill forever. That's too much. Just like any other quality section, you start slow. You follow a progression. You start slow, short, slow, and small, like short distances, short intervals, short durations, usually 10 second, 15 second, 30 second, and progress from there. You definitely don't want to do that every day. Usually, just like other quality sections, once per week, and you don't even do that every week. Every few weeks, you take break and then go back to it. And just like other quality sections, you want to build up your base first. You By base we mean consistent mileage. So you have consistent mileage on your for a couple of weeks strength training, everything under your belt. Then you start adding a little bit downhill. You don't start from the beginning, do a lot of downhills. It's follow progression, step by step, literally.
All right. So training smart with proper progression.
Yes.
right? Probably not the first time people have heard this on the show before. Not doing it every day, and so you're really taking no more than like one dedicated run a week where you're like, I'm going to focus on some downhill running, but you're
Hmm.
not focusing the whole thing. You're not, finding like, I don't even know if people use Map My Run anymore, but like you're not finding a course around your neighborhood that's like all downhill where you're just going for the gusto. Like, let me run the whole thing downhill, right? You're saying take it in small chunks. It's starting
Yes.
literally at 15 seconds or doing, yeah, I guess you could do repeats, right? You can
Yes.
literally just find a hill in your neighborhood,
Hmm.
run 15 seconds downhill, maybe walk or jog back uphill, right?
Hmm.
And just get used to almost like how we do strides, right? Like
Yeah.
you just getting the body, introduced to like strides, faster running. We just talked about this actually with Carolyn Coffin, episode 213. And I loved how you mentioned before quality when you use the
Hmm.
term quality run or workout. And we talked about what that is in episode 213. But we also talked about strides and what
Hmm.
they are in that episode. And as you said this, it kind of reminded me of, almost thinking about it as strides to introduce the body to it, as opposed to just going for, hey, the whole run, the whole 3 miles, I'm going to do downhill, or I'm going to, my long run. Let me find a downhill course around my neighborhood to do my 10 miler this weekend. No, like gradually introduce it.
Gradually, you
Okay.
may get there at some point, but gradually, you, eventually it may be part of your long run spice,
Yes.
which
I
is a
love it.
long some speed work during the long run, usually the latter part of the long run to mimic the race. But that will be really close to the race specific training, the last few later in the training cycle. Let's put it this way.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So we're kind of doing it progressive, doing it no more than once a week. And then
Hmm.
do we do it every single week, like leading up to our race?
No, no, no. Yeah. Well, because downhill training has so much impact to the body. Every few weeks you want to cut it back too. You don't even have to do that every week. You can do that every other week as well. But you start progress gradually. Do that every 2 weeks, every week, or every other week on the peak week. And then when you taper, take 1 or 2 out, maybe every other week, just to get body more recovery.
Perfect. Recovery, part of the training, right? So again, it's
So
another
important.
step in those 6 steps to growing as a runner. So making sure that we're not doing it every single week in a 12-week training block, 16-week training block, but
Hmm.
we're having specific weeks that are planned in. Hey, I'm going to let my body recover from all this downhill, training that I've been introducing into my body. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And you talked about like duration. How
Mhm.
about like how do we know how much downhill or like percentage wise, or I don't even know at like races, Lou, for like the Revel ones, did they give you like a percent grade?
The, they well, for this White Mountain, I don't have it, but there's a graph you can kind of calculate. It's pretty aggressive, about 300 feet per mile or 200 feet per kilometer, something like that. It's very aggressive for the first half marathon.
Okay.
For the first 5 miles, and similar for Boston too. The first 2 mile, 3 miles is like 300 feet elevation drop every mile too, so it's very significant. But then it goes more gradual afterwards.
All right. So with training wise, do you specifically have your athletes gradually think about like don't find the steepest hill in your neighborhood? So do you try to gradually decrease or gradually increase the amount of decline that they're running?
Yeah. Yes, there are different theories. Jack Daniels recommend something around 2%. That's really not too much. Runner's World said 8%. In When I practice on that, I usually advise my runners to stay between 2 to 6%. 8% is just too steep. I'll say
Right.
2 to 6%, and use that randomly. If you run that on your treadmill, you can do that random hills. Sometimes you have downhills, but if not, you can check your plan a route and find some downhill that's 2 to 6%. They also it depends on the duration, right? If you're going for shorter duration, maybe 6% is fine. It's 15 seconds as you
Mm-hmm.
learn going downhill. But if you're going longer, maybe you want to make it a little more gradual, 3%, 2%, something like that.
Yeah, and this might be a stupid question, so I apologize in advance. But
No worries,
how
no
would
stupid
someone, if
questions.
they're running in their neighborhood, how would they know like the percentage of a hill? Is there an easy way to determine that or find that out?
There are many ways. I only know a few. If you plan a route from Garmin, it will show the the elevation gain and drop.
Right.
Percentage not quite easy. You can kind of calculate it by looking at the percent elevation gain divided by the distance. It's, it's about
Okay.
right. I believe Coach Cat mentioned that we have some geeky discussion about that. You calculate, for example, 50 feet, you kind of convert that to miles, how many feet to miles, and then say you have 1 mile, you have 200 feet elevation gain. So you do a conversion between feet and miles, and then divide the 200 to 1 mile, right? And then multiply the conversion factor. You can put that into
Mhm.
Excel. So then you you just put in the elevation gain and the distance, and you will give you a table. So you don't have to remember the conversion factor and then do the calculation every time. Especially when you're running, you don't want to do runner's math when you're running hard.
Right. Right. I guess and you mentioned treadmill, and I understand maybe not all treadmills go downhill, but I would imagine that's a feature that's common on a lot of like the gym-based treadmills now, or no, not really?
Only for the advanced ones.
Okay.
If you have some treadmill at home, well, do that really carefully. You can raise the base of the treadmill a little bit to make it downhill because it always have uphill, right? If you make it 2% downhill, you can just raise it up. So maybe if you want a flat,
Mhm.
and that's actually Jack Daniel recommend that. But you do want to make sure you have a really really stable base. It doesn't slide because when you run hard and it move, if you raise the button, there will be a safety concern.
There we go. Thank you. I think you just fulfilled our liability requirement for the podcast. If you're listening to this, we do not want you injuring yourself, falling off your treadmill, raising up your treadmill at home on an unstable surface. So make sure you are making sure that your treadmill is stable with whatever you are propping it up with. Thank you,
And
Lou.
you don't want to raise it really high too. Only a little bit, uh, depending on how long your treadmill is, right? You raise a little bit, it may end up 1 or 2%, but that's usually enough. two
Okay.
percent, let's say, usually enough.
All
Just a
right.
little bit downhill on the treadmill.
Okay, perfect. And I guess it's easier obviously to feel like what a 1% or a 5% incline feels like on a treadmill. Like, and that's what my coach had told me when just even doing some like hill strides, right? Is because I was like, how do you figure out the percent? Um, but she was like, go on a treadmill and just see like how that feels, right? So you have a sense of how that felt, like what is a 2% versus a 5% versus a 10% feel like on a treadmill. So then when you're out there on the road, you have a kind of a sense of, how much are we going to pitch our body forward a little bit to get an awareness. So I guess a nice little quick tip there. But it is a little more difficult to do it downhill and to figure out that percent.
On Even with Google Map, it's possible. You find some, if you have a road that's kind of constantly gradual downhill or uphill, whatever elevation change, you can in Google Map you can set two dots on the map, right? And then you put the start and end of the 2 points. You get the difference in the elevation. You get the distance. So you use that. You use the elevation change divided by the distance. That give you the percentage. It's a very rough estimation, but it's pretty close, especially for the hills that's not like crazy uphill or downhill for that
Man, you just
matter.
gave me like a flashback to like, physics like 110 or something when we used to have to calculate like velocity and like the car is stopping like 50 feet from from the light going at this speed, calculate the velocity, and man, I just got like a flashback there.
Not, I don't want to get it too overwhelming. It just
Right.
you pick 2 points in Google Map, Garmin Connect. It gives you the distance. It gives you the elevation change. Divide the change elevation change by the distance, and that's it. Not too
All right.
hard, right?
Yeah, and the main take home message here is start gradual. Even if you wanted to roughly calculate what in your mind feels like a small decline
hmm
or a mild right downhill, then that's where you start. Right? Don't start at the moderate or the severe downhill or steep downhill. Really what you're talking about is progressing and in thinking, you know, around 4, you could start 2%, but 2, 4, 6%.
hmm
You're not recommending 8% starting there, right? Start slow and a minor decline before you go to the major declines is the take home point here, right?
Yes. The other
All
thing I
right.
want to add is terrain too. To start with, you want to go with some easy flat surface. I know a lot of trail runners running downhills, practice downhills. It can be technical. So if you want to start doing downhill on the trail or on a road that's uneven, you want to find a road that's more even and there's not a lot of potholes on the ground or on the trail with a lot of grooves, and make it less technical. Start with the easiest one, so you don't have to worry that much about the have a step on something and then fall. That would be the least thing we want to. The last thing
So
we
you
want
want
to
to
have
start with
happen.
stable surface. You're going to have
Stable
stable surface
surface.
before you go to the uneven surfaces, because you're already adding in a factor and really bringing up, a common injury on unstable surfaces is like rolling your ankle or getting an ankle sprain. And
hmm
because you are running downhill, it is going to force your ankle to be in what we call more of a plantar flex position, which is a more unstable position of your foot. So it gives you more risk at spraining your ankle. And if now the terrain is unstable, so now you land with that foot on the outside, let's say, then you're going to be more likely because the position of the ankle and plantar flexion to roll that ankle. So
Yeah.
from my PT brain, that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
Uh, I love it. So besides kind of um, starting slow,
hmm
small duration, lower amount of decline. I know it's like that double negative thing. So starting with a small percentage of
Yeah.
downhill. What other tips for training do you have for running downhill?
Our favorite one, strength training.
Yeah. Strength training. Okay. Why is strength training important? Like why would you say it is like we know it's important for all runners. Let's just, put it out there if you haven't heard us talk about it before. It
hmm
is another one of the steps to how we grow as a runner. I feel like we're going to talk about all the steps today, right? We're going to somehow get nutrition into this conversation. um, so it is one of the steps in how we grow as a runner is strength training to get our body resilient. Why is it that much more important for downhill running?
Because when you're going downhill, the muscle, especially the quad, are going on the eccentric phase, which is easier to get torn, and that's You may hear a lot of people complain about their quads are firing when going a lot of downhill. That's what it is. Eccentric phase is when the muscle fibers are elongated to stop the force. So it's easier. So you are literally toning the muscle because it's elongated, and that's why you want to strength training. You want to focus on eccentric phase of any exercises related to quads. For example, squat. You focus on squatting down slowly, with control, and then quickly bounce up. So that's one example, eccentric phase.
I love it. So we're focusing on what some people might call like negatives, right? So they're taking
Yeah.
2 to 5 seconds to lower in like a single leg squat, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're coming up with a quick explosive concentric phase. Love it.
Yes.
So what you're alluding to, Lou, is that you're taking downhill, looking at the
Mm-hmm.
demands that it has on the body,
Yes.
and now you're applying what we call specificity of training to your
Yes.
strength training for running. And you're saying, you know what, because my race is a lot of downhill, I need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that when I am doing my squats in the gym, when I'm doing my single leg squat, I need to actually focus on doing a good eccentric contraction and control, that I'm not going to go
Exactly.
down fast and come up fast. I want to actually teach my muscles how to withstand the force
Mm-hmm.
that it takes to control the movement. Because think about it, when you're going downhill, it's your muscles, primarily the quads, are going
Mm-hmm.
to be the main muscle that's controlling how many degrees your knee comes over your ankle, because that is essentially the position that's going to happen. And it's that patellar tendon, quad muscle that is all going to be stressed with that. So it adds more stress and load to the tendon. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are a master's runner and you're in your 40s, you're definitely more at risk for getting a tendon injury and a tendinopathy, we call. You could get an acute tendonitis if you just went out there and tried to do some 15% downhill running, right? Then you'll get this inflammation around the tendon. But most folks will wind up getting this like slow ache, and then it feels stiff. And then they have pain with squatting, they have pain
Mm-hmm.
with running downhill, and they'll feel it like on, let's say, the quad tendon at the lower
Mm-hmm.
part of the quad muscle. So now we need to prevent that by strength training and to
Yes.
strengthen that structure. So then when that structure goes under the demands of downhill running, it's been there
Mm-hmm.
before. It's
Yeah.
strong enough to withstand it. So it
Yes.
doesn't get this pain, this tendinopathy, and you have a nice strong structure, strong tendon. Um, if I could add to this a couple of the techniques that I've really enjoyed and been implementing into my training in the last couple of years to prevent things like patellar tendonitis, quad tendinopathy. And this would be if you're not having pain, by the way. So those of you who are like, whoa, I heard him say patellar tendinopathy, patellar tendon pain. I have that. My knee hurts and I have pain there. This would not be for you right now, unless you're under the guidance of someone who is applying the appropriate exercise and dosage for your specific pain. But for prevention wise, and I think this is a thing many runners have always heard, or many people who have strength trained, is like never have your knees go over your toes. And I've given that tip many times before. And I've given that tip for those who have patellofemoral pain because of the loading forces to the actual patella on the knee joint and the contact forces. But for those who might be more at risk for tendon pain and or they have the demands of downhill running,
Mm-hmm.
you actually in strength training want the knee to learn how to go over the ankle. And what we call is that tibial advancement in controlling it. One of the great variables that we can control and that I've been playing around with, honestly, for the last 2 or 3 years are wedges underneath your heels. And those who have really stiff ankles might have tried this in the gym. Maybe you put plates underneath your heels to give you more relative ankle mobility, which is a great technique. So to improve your squat form, let's say. So I've been utilizing those underneath my heels for squats to get more range of motion, but it also will take your knee and bring it over your ankle. So there's going to be more degrees that your knee goes over your ankle, mimicking essentially what's going to happen when you run downhill and
Mhm.
mimicking the forces that are going to go to the patellar tendon and the quad muscle that you speak of, Lou. Um, and you have to do that gradually, progressive, right? All of that. But I've also love it for front step ups. I love
Mhm.
it for single leg squats, step downs. I love it with placing the ankle in that plantar flex position because it forces the knee to go over the ankle, forcing
Mhm.
more demand to the quad muscle, strengthening it. And then if you
Uh-huh.
do it with a slow lower, like you mentioned, then it's like, boom, we're getting even more bang for our buck. We've now kind of positioned the knee where it's in a position that's going to put more force. And now we're controlling that. So the muscle's contracting eccentrically and I'm strengthening it. So I agree. Like all those are they need to be honestly integrated into that runner's strength training program if they're going to be tackling downhill running, especially if
Mhm.
it's like your first marathon that you're doing downhill. Like you have to prepare the body for these demands.
Wow, such great information. I learned a lot too.
Yeah, and if you remind me, Lou, I will
Mhm.
actually, because I have a bunch of videos actually with those wedges,
Mhm.
with doing those exercises I mentioned. I just haven't had time to post them for like content wise. So I
Mhm.
have the videos. If you remind me the week that this gets released, I'll make a little reel and show you what I'm talking about of what those exercises look like that will help prepare the body for downhill running.
Yeah, now I you mentioned that yes, the wedges definitely simulate the orientation of the legs when you're going downhills. That's great.
Yeah. So besides strength training, any other tips that you have for training for downhill running and how
Well,
we do it?
still kind of strength, but also balance training. It's about running is single legs, but it's even more so when you going downhill because you are hitting the ground harder because you're falling too, and you want to do more, incorporate more single leg exercises, balance exercises like one leg squat, single leg squat, um, single leg deadlift, and other things you have like the airplane.
Yeah.
Single leg exercises really helpful. And like you said, even for the strength training, you want to do gradually increase too, not just boom everything together.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's a good point too. Because we didn't kind of mention that. Like we're talking about adding these into training, but if someone's starting right now, right, we don't want you to throw all of these elements all at once. And
Yeah.
if you are adding in for the first time ever, doing some of these strength training exercises, and the first time ever actually training to run downhill, you
Mhm.
you have to start even more conservative. And I don't care if you're doing squats or front squats and you're used
Mhm.
to pushing, I don't know, 145 pounds, like 225, whatever it is. You're going to have to back the weights down, the resistance down, if now you're going to really focus on the lowering phase because you'll see like you will feel that delayed onset muscle soreness. You're going to get some DOMS, as we call it, if you try to add in too much all at once. So good
Mhm.
point too with like blending the
Yeah.
running and the progression you talked about earlier, but then also with the strength training, like you need to take all of that into consideration.
Yeah.
Perfect. Any last tips?
Another tip is someone may ask a question: what if I live on a hilly area? So I there will be uphill and downhill all the time anyway. In that case, you probably get some experience on running hills from in the first place. But if you just move to a hilly place, then just run slow. And I would say you can keep up the pace when you're running uphill to get some benefits. We have uphill running podcast. We can just refer back to that episode. But then when you just if you move from flat to a hilly place, you or rather I would usually recommend when you actually go down slow If you have to walk downhill, you can run up hills and go to walk downhill before you start this downhill specific training. And then you get used to your neighborhood, and you get used to gradually you can increase the pace going downhill. But that's even if you live in a hilly place, and then you're gonna train for the race, downhill race. It's different. You still want a dedicate sections for downhill training, even if you live on a hilly place, because you just keep rolling. It's different from dedicated sections
Mm,
of downhill, because as you do reps, each time you do it, you have an intention, and each time you do it, you have something go in your mind. You pay attention to it. You learn. Your body learn to form. Each time you do it, your body get used to it and improve, and so on and so forth. It's different for consciously training for it rather than just rolling unconsciously. It helps, but it's different.
right, right. No, that makes sense. And you know, what is the? I know you like to refer to it as like you need to almost give yourself like a little pep talk, right? Like before you're going out there, say you are tackling this quality. I use that air quotes there, the quality run of your week or your downhill focus run of your
Mhm.
week. You know, like what's the pep talk that you want your runners and your athletes to be thinking about?
Start conservatively, and do not just go out and go hard all the time, and enjoy it.
Enjoy it. I love it. I love it. So be patient.
Progressively progressively training for it, and enjoy it.
Yeah, and the body will adapt. That's the beautiful thing about the body, right? It will adapt, and like you mentioned earlier, with practice, you will get better at it,
You
right? So
will.
even if right now you think, "Oh, I suck at downhills," or I can never run downhills well. I do everything that Duane talked about before. I'm the one like slowing down at the race, and I'm trying to stop myself, and I feel like I'm losing time. Or you know what? I noticed my quads were killing me after that race. They were so sore. Maybe you spent too much time braking, right, during those downhills. But with some of these strategies that Lou talked about, like you will get better at it. You just need to be purposeful, right, and
Mhm.
do it with intention. And I guess
Yes.
that's like the biggest for me, the take home and like my little, I'm going to say clinical pearl, my running pearl of wisdom is that you will improve over time and just be patient and be intentional when you're
Yes.
running down hills now, as opposed to just like going with the flow and or taking off and thinking, hey, this is easy, I'm going downhill.
Mhm.
Right.
Yes.
Nice. So if lastly, like, we
Mhm.
close the show out here. If we want to think about, one misconception of downhill running, what would that be?
We always say practice make perfect, but when you're training for downhill race, doesn't mean you have to practice that every day. You it's still it's actually more impact than a uphill running or flat road running. So do not do a lot of downhill. Do not overdo it. Do a few sections progressively, and strength training, and you will do great. Believe in yourself. Don't get freak out and do a lot of downhill. No, no, no. You're gonna kill yourself. You're gonna get injured. Don't do that. Don't
Got
overdo it.
Don't overdo it. I love it. I love it. So just kind of summary, guys. Today we really talked about like did an in-depth episode here on downhill running, and we
Mhm.
talked about like what was the difference between running downhill versus running flat. We talked about what are the demands that it has on your body. We talked about those demands to the musculoskeletal system, how it's easier on the cardiovascular, so it feels easier, but there's
Mhm.
actually more forces to your structures in your body, so that does
Yes.
increase the risk of injury a little bit if you don't do all the things that Lou talked about. And those things he talked about was like training properly
Mhm.
and proper progression. I heard strength training, specifically
Yes.
eccentric strength training, especially the quad muscles, making sure you're doing some quad focused strengthening in your strength training routine. Don't overstride. You talked about form. I liked all of those form cues that you gave us in kind of staying relaxed,
Mhm.
increasing your cadence, avoiding overstriding with the form.
Yes.
And you really talked about like progression in terms of, the percentage of elevation, the duration that you're doing these
Duration.
downhill repeats, how often you do them in the week, only once a week. And then make sure you have a cutback week every couple of weeks in your
Yes.
training. You're not doing 12 straight weeks of downhill focused running. And then I love the kind of pep talk and the mindset piece of it in really being patient, being realistic, and have fun with it. Right? It
Yeah.
is something that we're always kind of growing and learning from. And I guess probably the best resource, if you are really focusing on a downhill race now, I would imagine it's probably the half marathon or the marathon distance that you're really like looking to like delve into downhill running. And we do have a full marathon training guide for beginners and advanced runners with longevity in mind, that we really get into all the different types of elements of how we do marathon training the right way, whether you're a beginner or advanced. Coach Lu has done many of those trainings within this guide. We have all the videos of those trainings on topics such as long runs with spice, how we do speed work, how we fuel our bodies for marathon training, getting that other bucket, and then the recovery, how we do marathon recovery, either during training or after your race. So you can get your download by just simply going to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com/marathon to get all of that goodness for your marathon training. And if you really loved some of the things that Coach Lu talked about today, and you were like, you know what, this is a lot to think about. Like, you know what? I have a job. I have a family. I'm a busy person. I do not have the time to do all this research and implement this all myself and still guess and hope for the best outcome. And you just want to like offload that off your plate so you don't have to worry about it. Like, you can work with Coach Lu where he can actually guide you and structure this all out for you, how that progression looks like, do it the right way so you can avoid getting injured and being able to master downhill running within your training, within our Spark Healthy Runner coaching program. If you want to learn more about that and be able to hop on a call with me, see if you're a good fit to work with Coach Lu or anyone really on our team, you can just go to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com/coaching. So yeah, Lou, man, this is awesome. Thank you so much. This was like kind of one of those really niche specific episodes that, we had in the idea pile for a while. And I think the timing right
Mhm.
now with many runners training for, let's say, Boston, or
Mhm.
if they're training for a Revel race, is like perfect timing.
Mhm.
So hopefully this is really helping you guys who are listening to this right now, and you're going to be able to implement some of this into your training to get better at running down hills. And then lastly, if you are training for a spring race, be sure to check out the next episode. We already have it planned, where Coach Lu is going to really answer your race day tips and really
Mhm.
your race day questions. So heading into the spring races, we're going to release that episode probably beginning of April. So stay
Mhm.
tuned to that. It will be like great timing wise, whether you're running a half or a full this spring. I think this episode will be very, very helpful for you. Make sure you get on our email list because we're going to actually poll our audience on what are the race day questions that you want Coach Lou to answer. So make sure you get on our email list. You will see the links in the show notes to this, or just go to sparkhealthyrunner.com. You can sign up and be able to add your input into that episode. So I just love all the content that you share, Lou. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to share it with our audience today.
It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to share and fill me in with any questions. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, and thank you guys for listening, honestly, to this episode. Hope you found value in it. And if you did, and you know someone who is running a downhill race and you think they would benefit from these tips, like, just honestly, wherever you're listening to this, copy the link, share it to them, send a text to your friend and be like, hey, check this out. I listened to this. I learned these 2 things and I'm going to start implementing. I think things will be helpful for your Boston training, your Revel race. They live in a hilly area. You just want to help a friend out. They got a lot of hills near their house. I appreciate that. And as always, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and let's just keep on running. Until next time.
Bye.